Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Ursa and it's here, update 1.2.5, which blimey, there are a lot of changes in this one. We're going to go through them before the launch next week at the time of filming, but I want you to think about this update in two parts. Firstly, there is a bunch of updates for the entirety of Civilization 7, so no matter what edition of Civ 7 you own, you will receive these updates, and then there is the Right to Rule stuff, which is the DLC. If you have a deluxe edition of the game or you bought the DLC separately, this will matter for you. So what are the three updates? Should we be excited about them? I think there's a lot to be excited about here. New maps and improved map gen. Now, whilst this little infographic that was released tells us a little bit about them and gives us some tantalizing pictures, I want to have a look at this. These dev diaries are an amazingly cool little deep dive into the minds of the devs. Not just the changes that are being made, but why are they being made? And in this case, how are they being made? This is a very, very long article. I'm not going to read the entirety of it out. I will summarize it for you instead. Patch 1.2.5 is bringing to the table two new types of maps, and we can see them demonstrated here. Continents and islands and Pangaea and islands. And these are two examples of such maps. You can see Continents Plus and Pangaea Plus are the previous styles of maps that have been in the game so far. And as you can see, they are cast by what we have affectionately called the Civ 7 ruler. Look, it's a continent and then it stops, a vertical line, and then the islands are here and then it stops, a vertical line. The dev diary talks about this a little bit. When the game was announced, because of the game mechanics that involve distant lands and the exploration age, they decided to focus more on making sure the maps were procedurally generated in a way that led to a totally balanced game. We've been talking about balanced game a lot on this channel recently. It's the extreme example of. Think about these continents is it doesn't matter whereabouts on the coastline you are, you always start roughly the same distance away from the islands that have the distant lands. Pangaea Plus was a very extreme example of this. You had one large Pangaea landmass and then very straight bays and islands that generated in a straight line as well. These had all of the resources on them. Now these maps, from purely a balance point of view, they work perfectly fine, but as you can see, they're all very samey, very weird looking, and entirely predictable, which is why we have these two new map scripts. Now, I'll be honest with you, going from a fractal map generation, which is where a computer, I'm going to get this totally wrong, please forgive me computer programmers, this is my attempt at knowing what's going on. A fractal map generation, which is effectively where you put entire rules on the entire map at once. The developers have been trying a different style of map generation called the Voronoi map generation, which is where instead of going for big fractal things, you start, as this graphic sort of shows, with little pinpoints on the map and then you expand around them from there. So effectively what happens is you create really weird, wriggly and randomly generated maps. This example shows it a lot better. So the map starts by popping a lot of little dots on and then it slowly grows organically around, creating what are much more organic and random sized maps. What do you need to know about this change? Well, these two new map scripts generate very, very different, much more organic looking maps where there is no longer a vertical line separating continents and distant lands. Now, distant lands can be north or south of the homeland. You can have islands scattered in all directions, top, bottom, left, and right. And, well, effectively, the maps are entirely less predictable. Now, this is a really, really good change. I am a fan of having as many different types of map script in a game as possible. And especially for single player, this is going to be a huge change because it means that we're going to have terrible starts again. With any randomness in a map, you will have God legendary starts and the challenging terrible starts. We're going to see a lot more of that variation. For multiplayer, this type of map script is probably going to be a load of nonsense. But as many maps as we can get, I just want to see more maps thrown into the game. And there was hidden in here a little hint, a little extra bit that I thought would be really, really cool. Read this. This was just the beginning for our revamped work on maps. This technique was built with customization, expansion, and modding in mind from the beginning. As a result, you can expect more map options, future improvements to existing map types, and more exposed settings over time as we continue to develop this system. And yes, modders, Voronoi maps are available to you too. Yes, mod makers are going to be able to use this new style of map generation. This in itself is a huge improvement for Civ 7, and I think we're going to see some amazing map scripts put onto the market. For a long time, mod makers have been very limited with the resources they've been able to adapt and change. The parameters within the game that are available to be changed have been quite limited. So now we're going to see some really cool map scripts. Big change, this one, very positive. Two more changes that were announced for everybody, which we don't have full details for at the moment, but I, again, massively welcome, are the Napoleon Rebalancing and the new themed city-states. Napoleon is where I would like to start, because if you've played Civ at all, you'll know, well, if you watch this channel at all, that Napoleon is rubbish. Now, he should be really cool, because I like the general ideas. +1 movement on all land units sounds really cool, and to an extent it sort of is, but the problem with movement on Civ 7 is we now have rough terrain. All terrain takes one movement per tile. If at any point you step onto a tile with rough terrain, it ends your turn. No more of the system that we used to have in Civ 5 or Civ 6, where tiles had an amount of movement depending on the type of terrain. So in Civ 6, for instance, if you have a hill, it takes 2 movement, a forest and a hill, 3 movement. So having +1 movement on all land units means that it actually does work. You could stand, if you had 4 movement, onto a tile with a hill and a forest and then move off the other side of it. Whereas in Civ 7, it doesn't matter if you've got 4 movement or 74 movement. Your unit will stop as soon as it hits a wood. So this ability was never particularly good. Also, defeating an enemy unit provides culture equal to 50% of its combat strength. This is nothing. This is so small. It's so negligible. I've never seen just a time ever that this has been useful. Emperor Napoleon as well. The continental system is really expensive, and it barely does anything to people. The gold per age for hostile relations of people is really fun, and rejecting endeavors is cool, but he's just not a very good leader. He's very underpowered. So the information we have so far is very cool. The continental system now offers more options and bigger rewards, making diplomacy a stronger tool. Hugely cool. I think the continental system was one of the most interesting parts of the game. I think it's just a really cool idea, having sanctions that can really suppress people. So if we can do this in a way that's more impactful, we could see a really interesting single player leader. As revolutionary, he gains extra culture from combat and a boost the first time war is declared on him each age. Well, more culture is good. Even 100% of combat strength in culture would be a big improvement, especially in the early stages of the game when you're dealing with independent nations. But having culture when the AI declares on you, that could be really cool. Big caveat on these is we don't know the exact numbers, but very positive change for a leader who I consistently rank as being the weakest in the game. And then new themed city-states, adding 2 new types of city-states, expansionist and diplomatic, each with unique suzerain bonuses and improvements for every age. Expansionist city-states boost growth and settlements, whilst diplomatic city-states focus on happiness and diplomacy. Oh lord, we have needed these for some time. I mean, let me just show you. When you load up Civ 7, you will notice that there is a small disconnect between 2 different types of yields. Firstly, the legacy path yields: culture, military, science, and economic. There are only 4 of them, 4 paths you follow throughout the game to win the game. And this is what the city-states have been based so far on. You have culture, military, science, and economic city-states around the map. Not that many of them are still alive in this game. But those aren't the only resources, because in the attributes, we have 2 more. Yes, you've got cultural, economic, military, and scientific, but lo and behold, diplomatic and expansionist. And the leaders have these as specialist attributes as well. But diplomatic and expansionist, well, they don't have any legacy paths. You can't win the game. Now, I said this a long time ago, and I am going to re-put in my forecast, my prediction for Civ 7. I have no evidence to back this up other than a gut feel, but I believe later on, diplomatic and expansionist legacy paths are going to be added into the game, and there will be victory conditions added in that include both of these paths. I'm just calling it now. I said it before, I think eventually we will see this, and for me, bringing city-states on those 2 attributes into the game kind of backs that up further. Early game, especially in antiquity, happiness and settlement limit have been 2 resources that are incredibly difficult to get, especially if you are trying to dominate the map with military, and especially if you're trying to settle wide. So having ways to increase your settlement limit and your happiness are really quite welcome, especially influence. We've had no influence, real interaction with city-states up until this point, apart from the fact that you can just throw influence on them. But we all know how important food is. Food is incredibly important. So city-states giving you food? Yeah, really cool. Interesting idea, and one that I'm looking forward to seeing executed into the game. Yeah, we like this change. This change is cool. Having more improvements for every age is really cool as well, because we've only got one improvement per city-state type per age. It means you see the same 4 over and over and over. It's like, okay, I can build a hill fort or a monastery or, you know, any of the other ones. He says, not being able to remember any off the top of his head. Look, it doesn't matter. Anything that increases the rarity, it's a big tick from me. Now, I expect there to be also some balance patch changes, some debugging. We'll find out the information on that later, but now we talk about the right to rule. The right to rule was a DLC introduced with the Founders Pass, or you could buy it separately, and more leaders and civilizations were promised on it in late September. Here we are. And here they are indeed. Lakshmibai, the second leader after Genghis Khan. She is a sort of military diplomatic leader that works with city-states, which is quite nice because we've got more city-states coming into the game. Increased influence towards initiating the city-state incorporate action. Gain control of all of the city-state's units when performing the incorporate action. When one of your land military units defeats an enemy unit, gain influence equal to a percentage of its combat strength. Well, this is already really cool because we were just talking about Napoleon not being particularly good because he was generating culture on kills. Why is it not very good? Well, generally speaking, compared to the yields we're getting, currently like 82 culture per turn, the combat strength of enemy units is incredibly low. Look, this archer has a combat strength of 10, which means Napoleon would get 5 culture from killing it compared to 82. It doesn't really work, but influence is a much harder to get resource. So this is really cool. A way to get influence, especially in antiquity, is awesome. But this bit is interesting towards initiating the city-state incorporate action. This is one of those things that I bet most of you will have never done. Certainly, it's a mechanism within the game that I barely scratched until the Iceland TSL game I did recently. When you are in a game, simply go to a city-state that you have suzerained, like this one, and you will see you have a bunch of projects that you can spend your influence on. You can promote growth, bolster military, and levy unit. Now, promote growth essentially gives the city-state tons of extra food, so you'll see it gain population and spread across the map. Bolster military simply makes it build more units. If you're trying to use it as a buffer state, it can be quite handy to do that. Or you can levy units, which isn't particularly useful because they're incredibly expensive, but it does mean sometimes you can find generals. It's not often, but city-states do build generals, and if you can catch one and then sort of buy the general, it's a really cheap way of bringing them into your game. I do quite like that. That's really awesome. But there's another one if you scroll down. Incorporate city-state. It's expensive. 240 influence in this case. Incorporate this city-state into your civilization as a new town when the diplomatic action completes in 10 turns. What does that mean? Well, it means that this city-state would become a town in my empire. It would add to the settlement limit and I'd get all the yields as if it was my own. And it's a very good way of getting what is a very established, very grown, very built out settlement for basically the price of a bit of influence. Also, you can press promote growth beforehand, and whilst it's incorporating, the thing is receiving tons and tons of food, so it'll even be bigger. Now, when you incorporate, a few things happen. Firstly, all of the military units are lost, which is a bit of a shame. I don't want them to be lost. I want to use them. Well, luckily, with this new ruler, you get to keep all of the units. So, a very small, I think this is going to be a very situational benefit, but it's a cool one. But the second one is actually the interaction between how city-states work with your empire. Whenever you suzerain something, you pick an ability. Now, it is annoying because it's incredibly difficult to find out what those abilities that you've chosen are. There isn't really a place where it's actually said, but as you can see, this is a scientific city-state, which means it's doing something for me. I think in this case, it was improving libraries. If I incorporate that into my nation, I keep that ability. Whatever ability it was giving, increasing the strength of libraries or the combat strength, for instance, it still applies. The thing that it does decrease is the number of city-states I have. So for the purposes of Tecumseh's ability, +1 to all city-states I own, or within the city-states themselves, sometimes they say 5% per city-state, or +2 per city-state, or whatever it might be. That does decrease. So that's why most people don't really integrate city-states at all. So keeping the unit and making that action cheaper means that you don't actually have to make settlers at all. Just suzerain city-states and then add them to your nation. It's awesome. I'm calling it now. I think as a leader, she is going to be distinctly underpowered. And I really, really hope that I'm wrong. Maybe this influence based on combat strength killing is going to be very cool. Maybe there are some early game shenanigans with city-states that I'm just missing out on. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm missing some part of this ability, but I'm not entirely sure that 50% influence towards incorporating or 100%, I mean, maybe 100% of combat strength as influence is good. I don't know. I can't wait to be wrong about this one. Now we have 2 civilizations added, one antiquity and one modern. Silla is the antiquity civilization and it is Korean. Silla receives increased culture on resources. We already have variations of this that give gold. Culture is early game incredibly useful. It's not improved resources, it is just resources. Note that this is not a cultural civ, so that's a little bit weird, but never mind. They are economic and diplomatic is Silla. So when you form an alliance, each leader receives a free trade route from the other leader's capital. These trade routes do not go away when the alliance ends, I imagine because it was too difficult to get rid of it in the coding. Still, it absolutely gives you a benefit to having positive relations with people. A free trade route. Yeah, trade routes with merchants are expensive, especially in antiquity. That's something where you can focus your merchants on other cities and use your alliances to do that well. The big caveat with this is that sometimes the AI just does not want to be your friend and there's nothing you can do about it, but it's useful. The tradition in towns with a happiness building receive increased happiness on resources. Again, we're all about resources here. It starts to stack with the culture. Happy and cultural, lovely. Then tier 2, defeating a unit with a Huang unique ranged unit provides culture equal to a set percentage of combat strength. Well, it's the Napoleon ability all over again. Playing Napoleon with this civ will be hilarious. Unlocks the strategic allies tradition and Emile Bell. There we go. We finally found a civ that works with Emile Bell. The tradition, strategic allies, all trade routes between you and your allies award food and production equal to a percentage of the trade route's gold. Oh my lord, Wisselbanken from Civ 6 has finally made its way into Civ 7. Now, this is quite cool. If you have an ally, you simply spam merchants and you can get tons of food and production. It's worth saying that some routes, well, they're not worth much. Like for instance, I know this is a city-state route, but this is only worth 4 gold. So at a very max 100%, we're dealing with 4 food and 4 production, which isn't a huge amount, but early game, it could lead to some very, very high production in a cultural wonder building capital. So I think that ability may be a little bit underpowered, but it could be nichely very useful. Gain a social policy slot, well, that's cool. Then we are just unlocking merchants and traditions, increased science for each imported resources. So just all yields for all resources, lovely. Increased resource limit in towns, increased gold and influence on resources slotted into trade outpost towns. These are the ones that increase your trade route range, and then increased land trade route range in all settlements. Yeah, it's weird. Silla's going to be this blend of a trade civ, a little bit like, say, Carthage or India, but with a lot of extra yields on resources. I could see somebody like Hatshepsut, Achaemenid Xerxes, anybody with that sort of trade route ability is going to really enjoy this civ. And then the unique stuff. We have the Dragon Temple, a very cool sounding thing. The unique quarter. Increased gold for every resource you have slotted in the city. Seems quite underwhelming, but it stacks. Anything that stacks is really cool. A culture-based lecture hall with increased resource limit if built on rough terrain. Okay, great for Silk Roads. That works nicely. And the Pagoda, a happiness base that gains influence adjacency bonuses with mountains and natural wonders. So we do have a rough starting bias. I think this is going to be one of those civs that really wants to be in the rough terrain by the mountains. Possibly a good route into playing somebody like Inca. Unique merchant, when you create a trade route to another settlement, receive a set amount of gold based on your relationship level. There is not a unique merchant in the game right now that I find utterly non-underwhelming. I hope that I'm wrong on this one, but I just don't think they're very good. We shall see. Hwarang, I think this is the unit in Civ 5, a unique ranged unit with increased movement and increased attack range. It counts as a cavalry unit and has increased bombard strength relative to the unit it replaces. It just seems to be a really powerful unit that, in a way, has absolutely no relation to the rest of the Civ. This is not a domination Civ. I don't know why it's got such a powerful unit. Odd. And then Emile Bell. We like Emile Bell. This is really strange. I find it a turtle civilization that wants to trade, yet it has that unique unit. Very odd. Very odd. I would have thought they would have worked better with a unit a little bit like the Gold Bangles infantry, or maybe even the Egyptian unique unit. I don't know. They seem interesting. They don't seem overpowered. They seem like a pretty well put together Civ that just wants to collect resources. Yeah, I think they'll be really Pretty cool. And then we have Qajar, the modern age civilization descending from Persia/Iran. Increased influence towards supporting diplomatic actions. I'm a little bit underwhelmed by this, and the reason for that is that the modern age is the one age where diplomatic actions mean almost nothing. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, this game is not a particularly good example because everyone's at war with me, but when you look at the endeavors you can do, such as military aid and local festival, pretty much every endeavor in the game starts really good and gets really bad as your yields go up. For instance, in antiquity, a supported cultural endeavor can give you up to 6 culture, which when you're on 10 at the beginning of the game is a huge increase, but now I'm on 82, it's already not very good at all. In the modern age, that difference is even bigger. Plus 18 when you have plus 300 culture means nothing. So most of the time you don't even want to support diplomatic actions because they don't mean anything. So I hope this has more of an impact than I think it will. Diplomatic and expansionist attribute. Okay, that's fine. The Sun Throne unlocks the unique building and the Erem Garden Wonder, a new wonder. This wonder gives a food-based and has an increased specialist limit in the city, must be built on a desert. Again, specialist limit isn't something you're really worried about in the modern age, so I'm not sure that wonder's going to be particularly sought out, but it does mean you can get crazy yields on a single tile. Who doesn't love that? Increased influence for every population in the capital. Ah, that does sound fun. We love huge capital spam with our feeding towns. Yeah, that could be fun. When you support an endeavor, receive a set amount of culture, whilst the other leader receives a set amount of gold. You better hope that you have positive relations with people because you can't control when people send you endeavors. Although if you're playing something like multiplayer and you're playing Queen of War Hamiko, that could be a good synergy on that ability. And we've got 12 gates, unlocks the unique building, and the tradition that increases science and culture in the capital based on the number of settlements you have fewer than your settlement limit. This is interesting. Increased food and production as well on tier 2 in the capital based on the number of settlements you have fewer than your settlement limit. Qajar is all about not settling wide. It reminds me a little bit of Nepal in the same reason. And this is where I'm a little bit torn because settlement limit, well, it's the most important thing in the game. Generally speaking in Civ 7, the more settlement limit you have, the better. And any unused settlement limit is simply yields that you could have in your empire that you are just not having. It's as simple as that. In 99 times out of 100, it makes more sense to settle up to your settlement limit than it doesn't. This is one of the first mechanisms in the game that has given us an ability that gets better the more settlements we have under the limit. Will it be powerful? Will it impact the game? I really, really hope it does. I really hope this is a really cool change because I fear this strictly goes against the meta of the game. The meta is to settle wide. I wonder if these abilities are going to be powerful enough to compensate for the lack of settlements. I hope they will. Increased combat strength to land combat units based on the number of settlements you have fewer than your settlement limit. Well, it's all stacking. Maybe this is the Civ that can do it. The turtle Civ, the tall Civ. Maybe. Commander units that are stationed on a district provide increased happiness is the final tradition. Happiness is not a problem in the modern age, but if you've got a problem, then again, the problem is with happiness. Normally you have a happiness problem if you're really over your settlement limit, not under it. Weird. The unique infrastructure, the Bak, a unique quarter that has increased influence and culture in this settlement during celebrations. So as long as you're celebrating, you get more stuff. It's going to be easy to celebrate if you're under your settlement limit, so that's a good synergy. The Tekya has a happiness base that gains influence adjacency with culture buildings. It's quite tricky, that one, but possible. And then another unique building with a food base in modern, that's pretty bad, that gains happiness adjacency with gold buildings. This is just all over the place. I don't know, this isn't really striking me as something that's going to be game changing in a good way. Unique civilian unit, a commander unit with increased movement that can raise a set number of additional districts per turn in settlements with this commander. That could be really, really fun if you've got a bit of a pillage build going, especially if you played someone like Bulgaria in exploration. This is the first thing I've seen that strikes me as quite a powerful ability. There's a unique cavalry unit that has increased combat strength and HP healing in the command radius of a unique commander, and we've spoken about the Wonder. This is really Jekyll and Hyde, isn't it? This civilization could be awesome, playing with pillage mechanics, playing with under-settlement capacity, but then also it kind of wants you to expand because there's happiness bonuses and food bonuses. Even the pillaging bonuses kind of tempt you to not go to war. Well, they tempt you to go to war with the other abilities suggesting you shouldn't. Very odd. I want to play this civ. I can't get my head around where they're going to be good. It just seems a bit nebulous. Interesting. Very interesting. But that is update 1.2.5. Another biggie. I think the thing I'm most excited about is the themed city-states. But is there anything here that I've missed? Let me know in the comments if so. What are you excited about? What do you think is going to work? What maybe is perhaps missing the mark slightly? Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye. And finally, a very special shout out goes to Glorious Petra, Clibben Thurdas, Poppy Dude, The Nickerman, Mushkin Mandeltort, Matthew Wilkinson, Paul Coffey, Toon General, Kappa Yobby Virani, The Uncivil Engineer, Radiatore, Debo91, Dan Jamo, Slither Alley, Scott Stratton, Skeptical Bear, Cinnamon Beard, Private Selection, Genoa Salami, Callum Billy, Garrett Gowan, El Truant, Creston, RB Hedged, Burial, I'm Daft, Gooberman, Dr. Bobby, Mixomatosis, NTG Golfman, Indigenous 68, Teddy's Ursa, Barnaby Rex, Charlie Bears, Nate the Great, Alex Frost, Mean Penguin, Interplanet Janet, Frankincense Battlezord, Geography Teacher, Juvara, Morax, Sinikush, Echo Bear, Legally Trash, Sorted Dutch, Rad Bickley, Shadow of Gaia, Bob Tway, Abstract Fun, JP Genius, Arctic Fox, Bookaluk79. Thank you everyone for your support. Goodbye!